a major data analytics company, one used by governments and law firms all over the world, confirms a data breach. Now, the attackers are claiming they got full access to their AWS infrastructure, pulled out millions of records, and even grabbed critical secrets right from the cloud environment. All right, let's pull this incident apart and see what the threat intel tells us from a security operations point of view. So, let's start with the threat actor's own words. The group, which calls themselves FulcrumSec, made a pretty specific claim about the amount of data they stole. 2 gigs of structured data. Right away, that sets the stage for the scale of the incident we're about to dive into.
Okay, first things first. Why does a breach at this company matter so much? To really get the impact, we need to understand exactly who they are and what they do.
LexisNexis is this massive, global provider of legal and business data. You know, their clients are the top-tier law firms, huge corporations, and even government agencies in over 150 countries. So what that means is they're a central hub for incredibly sensitive information, which of course makes them a prime target for attackers.
Now, for the technical side of things, how did the attackers actually get their first foothold inside the network? Well, the entry point, as we see so often in these cases, was a known unpatched vulnerability. So according to the threat actor, this whole thing kicked off on February 24th when they exploited something called React 2 Shell. This is a pretty well-known vulnerability in some front-end apps built with React. If it's left unpatched or it's misconfigured, it can let an attacker run their own code right on the server.
So the path in was a classic 1-2 punch. First, they hit the public-facing vulnerable application. And second, that single exploit gave them direct access inside a container running within the company's AWS environment. Just like that, they went from being on the outside to having an internal asset.
But, you know, getting in was just the start. The real damage came from what the attackers found once they were inside. This is the part of the story where a simple compromise just explodes into a full-blown incident.
And we don't even have to guess what happened next, because the attackers spelled it right out. They found that the container they'd compromised was running with a single, highly privileged role. This one role had read access to basically everything, including the master key for the production database. And just look at what that one role gave them access to. We're talking hundreds of database tables, dozens of secrets from AWS Secrets Manager just sitting there in plain text, and even employee password hashes. It was a complete treasure trove of credentials and data, all there for the taking.
This is a textbook example of why the principle of least privilege is so critical in cloud security. On the left, you see the situation they had. One compromised role exposed the entire environment. On the right is where you want to be. You contain the blast radius by making sure every single role has only the bare minimum permissions it needs to do its job, and nothing more.
Okay, so they had all this access. Now let's move on to the exfiltration and see how that translated into what was actually stolen and leaked out.
The numbers the attackers are claiming are pretty substantial. They allege that they walked away with nearly 4 million individual records pulled straight from the company's databases.
And it wasn't just the raw records. They claim to have compromised data tied to over 21,000 separate customer accounts. That could potentially expose all kinds of account details and usage history.
And here's the one that's probably most impactful for individuals. They say they took around 400,000 user profiles with PII, like real names, email addresses, and phone numbers. That's an absolute goldmine for future phishing attacks. But what's maybe most concerning, at least from an intelligence perspective, was the data on government employees. The attackers claim to have found 118 accounts with .gov email addresses belonging to people at the Department of Justice, the SEC, and even federal judges.
So that's the attacker's story. How did LexisNexis themselves respond to these very public and, frankly, very damaging claims?
Well, the company issued a statement that really aimed to downplay the severity. They emphasized that the data was old, mostly from before 2020, and that it didn't contain any highly sensitive PII, like social security numbers or financial data.
From an incident response perspective, it looks like they followed the standard playbook: contain the intrusion to stop any more damage, notify law enforcement and customers like they're required to, and bring in a third-party firm to do an independent investigation. These are the right steps for sure, but the damage was already done.
So here's the crucial point. When you put the company's statement and the attacker's claims together, what are the key takeaways for us as defenders? What can we learn from all this?
For me, it really boils down to 4 big ones. First,
patch your systems. It's basic, I know, but it is still the #1 way attackers get in. Second, the principle of least privilege in the cloud. It's not a suggestion, it's a hard requirement. Third, your secrets are only as secure as the roles that can access them. And finally, you have to threat model these exact scenarios. You need to know what an attacker could do if they compromise just a single container in your environment.
And that leaves us with the one question you should be asking your own teams after seeing this breakdown. Take a hard look at your own AWS, Azure, or GCP environment and ask this. Do we have a single role, a single set of permissions that could give an attacker the keys to the entire kingdom? Because as we've just seen, it really only takes one.